Thank you. Can you hear me in the back? All right, the magic of electronics. And a very capable electronic technician, Laura, behind me. I'm glad to be in Owensboro and at OCTC. I grew up in country not very different from this, actually, in northeastern Ohio. I taught my whole teaching career at Indiana University, which is about 120 miles, pretty much due north of here, in Bloomington, Indiana, and drove down this morning through gorgeous countryside in southern Indiana and also along the Ohio River from Rockport. I'm honored by the selection of Earthworks as your common reading, and I applaud the common reading program, not because my book was chosen, but because it seems to me extremely valuable for students in any institution, but also for teachers and staff in any institution to have something in common that connects them across their disciplines. People in this audience and people across the college are studying everything under the sun. Also, they're doing it across the road over there, and often we don't remember that we have common ground with one another, whether we're doing engineering or nursing or humanities or physics or business. I thought I was going to be a scientist. That's what I passionately wanted to be. As a kid, everybody knew me as the little would-be scientist, and that was true for me through my second year of college. And then at the end of my sophomore year, during the Vietnam War, I made a discovery that changed the course of my life pretty fundamentally. The two physics teachers who were my mentors, the ones who were most influential in shaping my vision of what it might be like to be a scientist, were both working on Pentagon contracts. I discovered that at the end of my sophomore year, and it disturbed me because I didn't like the thought that as a working scientist, I might have to go to the Pentagon to get funding for my research. And these physics professors told me that I was simply naive because that's where the money was. And if you wanted to do most kinds of physics, and it's true for certain other fields of science, you would have to persuade the Pentagon that your research might be relevant to them. They were working on a very newfangled idea called lasers. And lasers are still incorporated in the notion that we can shoot down enemy missiles and create a shield over America. An idea that no physicist I've ever talked with thinks is feasible, but politicians think it's feasible because it generates a lot of jobs. At any rate, in the midst of my college years, I realized that I didn't want to do that. I loved physics, I loved math, I was good at it, but that I wanted to do something that would not require me to look for funding from the military and perhaps to look for funding from anybody, and that would give me the opportunity to think about life. Not just my life, but life, what it means to be human. And all along during college, I had been following advice given to me by my favorite high school teacher, a man named Eugene Fahnert, who's now well up in his 80s and is retired from teaching, but still skis and travels to Europe with his wife every year and is very active. And he said to me, he taught English and French in my high school, in rural consolidated school in Ohio. There were 72 people in my graduating class, and about half a dozen of us were going on to college. And Mr. Fahnert, as I still think of him, said to me, "Now, Scott, it's okay, you're going to be a scientist, that's fine, but you don't want to be a narrow scientist, do you?" And I said, "No, sir." He said, "So every semester, you be sure you take a solid humanities course. History, religious studies, philosophy, literature, whatever interests you. And don't just follow science, wonderful as it is." And that made sense to me. I loved to read. And so while I was in college, those first 2 years, I was taking English courses, history courses, religious studies courses every semester. And when I left physics, for the reason I suggested before, when I felt that wasn't my path, I looked at my transcript and thought, what can I graduate with in 4 years? And it turned out the answer was English. So my junior and senior years in college, I added extra English courses and graduated with an honors degree in English. And I've never regretted that. The world, I guarantee you, did not lose a first-rate physicist. I'm not claiming it gained a first-rate writer, but it did enable me to follow a path which has been tremendously enriching. And that's really what I want to talk about, because this book, Earthworks, which is a selection of essays written over about a 30 or 35-year period, epitomizes for me why writing has enriched my life and how it has, but also, more importantly, how reading has enriched my life. What I know, for example, about being a woman, I've learned as much from books as I have from the women I've known in my life, including thousands of female students, and my own beloved wife, whom I met when she was 15 and I was 16, and my daughter and my sister and my mother. But I've learned as much about what it's like to be a woman, and it's like a lot of things to be a woman. It's not just one little narrow thing, from reading books. Similarly, when I was young, I got insight about what it might feel like to be old. Now I can remember being young, and I can understand firsthand what it's like to be old. I've learned about what it was like to live in other places in our own country, other places on Earth, and also in other ages. Reading has carried me outward from my own little narrow life, and everybody's life only directly encounters a tiny fragment of reality. But through books, and also through film, and through photographs, and through paintings and other art forms, but especially through books, works of literature, works of history, works of philosophy and religion. Through books, I have broadened my experience, my sense of the ways of being human. I've learned about other races, I've learned about other religions, I've learned about people whose values, whose goals in life are radically different from mine. And all of that learning has enriched me, has helped me to lead a life which is larger than it would have been without all that reading. And my own goal, two chief goals I have as a writer. One is, very selfishly, to understand my own life more deeply and understand the possibilities of being human more deeply. And then the second is to share whatever insights, however humble they might be, to share those with readers. When I look back at the table of contents in Earthworks, thinking about coming here, I recognized a pattern it's very much in the book, but it wasn't deliberate. I didn't set out to create this pattern. It was a natural evolution in my writing. My earliest essays were very personal essays. They were about my parents, about the men and women I knew growing up, about the places in Ohio in particular where I lived. They're essays about my origins, how I was influenced by a particular family, how I was influenced by a particular landscape. And not just my own family, but neighbors. What did the people around me do for a living? How many of them were unemployed? How many were not white? That's what I wrote about first, because those were the things that had shaped my character, shaped my values, shaped my outlook on life. And I wanted to understand them. So I wrote about them. And in the writing, I learned things. For example, one of the essays in the book is called "The Men We Carry in Our Minds." I was plucked up out of that little rural high school in Ohio by a full-ride scholarship to an Ivy League school called Brown, which is in Providence, Rhode Island. I had no notions of going to a private university. My parents could not possibly have sent me there. I was going to go to Ohio State University on a scholarship to study engineering. But I got this full ride from a good university, Brown University, and the same high school English teacher who advised me to take humanities courses every semester said, you know, go away from home. You'll see home more clearly. Going to Ohio State was not really going away from home so much. So that made sense to me, and it was a smaller school. Ohio State's very large. So I went to Brown. And when I got there, for the first time in my life, I met women students, who were really angry at men. This was in the 60s. I was in college from 1963 to 67. And I was bewildered why they were mad at men. And not at me. I didn't feel anger directed at me, but they just thought men had a corner on all the good things in the world, in particular work, that men had the good work and women just didn't have the opportunities. So for about a semester of my freshman year, maybe the whole of my freshman year, I was bewildered by this. Because I thought about the men I knew growing up, including my father. Most of them had back problems. A number of them had lost a finger. Many were chronically unemployed, be laid off. They worked at jobs that were hard on their bodies. And I didn't really envy their lives. I loved the men. I loved my father, but I didn't envy the kind of work they did. And conversely, the women I knew, now granted, I only saw the public lives of these women. I mean, what they would see to someone from outside their family. But their lives looked way more interesting to me. Very few of them worked outside the home. But they would visit with one another. They would go shopping. Most of them practiced some kind of art form or hobby or craft. They had time with children. They gardened. They did a variety of things. None of their bodies seemed to be ruined by the life that they led. And so I actually envied the lives of women. And I was kind of dreaded the lives of men that I knew. The other kind of men I knew as a boy growing up were soldiers. And that was not an attractive alternative for me. Only gradually it dawned on me that the women at my university were not thinking of the same kinds of fathers and mothers. They were thinking about fathers who wore ties and had a briefcase and got on the train and went into New York or Boston or Philadelphia and had secretaries, all female, waiting on them, had high salaries, had their names on doors. And the women they were thinking of were their mothers, almost all of whom had college degrees, and were at home with 1.8 children or whatever the average number of children was, and no opportunity in the work world to be a doctor or a lawyer or a business person or anything else that would make use of their skills and their knowledge and their training. So really, these women and I had come from different classes. We had come from different social settings. And their notions of what it means to be male, what's available to males and what's available to females, and what frustrations females experience, were very different from mine. And that was partly a function of geography, but it was mainly a function of class.